My name is Alfredo Spagna, and I'm a faculty of the Department of Psychology here at Columbia University, and I'm the organizer of the first event of the Living Lab you are attending today. So the first thing that you might be wondering is exactly what is the Living Lab, right? So the Living Lab is an idea initially, right, that tries to connect, as the title says, our department, our students, our faculty with the outside world. Sorry, I haven't asked. Can you hear me from the back? Yes, it's good? Great. So the need the Living Lab tries to tackle or to help or to work on is kind of twofold. The first part that we want to work on is for our undergraduate students. Somehow we want to provide with this event, with this series of events, a broader perspective of what an undergraduate can do once he or she has the degree. So we want to open their eyes on the millions of things that are out there that relate science and society, that are not only living in a laboratory, or maybe living in a laboratory that is outside in the real world. The second need that the Living Lab wants to kind of work on is to connect our department with the outside world. What does it mean that? So as psychologists and neuroscientists, we have something to say about how our society lives, what happiness is, and what is a healthy psychological lifestyle. And somehow we feel that very often we're a little bit detached by what's going on out there. Think about automation, right? Think about how automation is changing the job market. Think about artificial intelligence. Think about profiling, right? This all sound pretty scary to the outside world. But in reality, in our laboratory, we do use artificial intelligence. We do use algorithms. We do use automation to make things faster and more efficient. But we're not really saying it out loud. So the Living Lab tries to go forward and make our voice, start a communication, an interaction between the inside of our department and Columbia University and the outside world. Another example of the Living Lab is marketing, right? What is marketing? How can you profile a person? How can you use social media to profile a person? And how can you use social networks to profile a person? And we are somehow working on this every day in our laboratory. We have to make our voice more clear to the outside world. And so at this point, I guess you are wondering exactly why Isabella Rossellini, right? And this doesn't really sound like what Isabella Rossellini is. And in reality, let me tell you something. Isabella Rossellini is 1,000 things at the same time. And why her as the first event? Well, I've met her. I had the chance to meet her because I was her professor of statistics a few years ago at Hunter College. You might not know, or you might, that she just graduated from the Animal Behavior and Conservation program at Hunter College, CUNY. And I'm sure that you're already thinking like, what? And that's exactly what I thought when I first met her. I was like, wow. And, but that was just a very thin layer of what Isabella does. Initially, the first thing that I had to learn, so she taught me a lot of things. The first thing I learned is the more I gave her, the more statistics I taught her, I gave her, the more material I was going to feed her, the more she was going to learn. And she has no limits whatsoever. She wanted to know everything. We were during the elections in 2016, and she wanted to know what is polling, what is gerrymandering, what are all these statistics. Now it's time I can learn about this. I can know more about this and how this works. And then she just went completely kind of showing what her inner world is, and it's incredible. Do you know that she has a farm in Long Island? Do you know that she manages a farm? Do you know that she just wrote a book that is called My Chickens and I, right? Do you know that she makes fantastic Picasso-like drawings of all the animals she meets? Do you know that she has a show that is called Link Link Circus, in which she very gently dismantles one by one all the conception that we have of the animal world and the superior human brain. That's what Isabella Rossellini is, and I'm sure that this is just a little bit that I had that I was lucky to meet. So this is what the Living Lab tries to do. The Living Lab wants to bring out people that work in society, that work in science, and make them start talking to each other, because that's just what Isabella exactly is. So she is a living lab, and this is why she's the first guest. So please let me introduce her.
Thank you so much. Hi. So I met Alfredo because he was my statistic teacher. I don't think I could have done statistics without Alfredo. He was very generous, very attentive, catered to me, to my ignorance, even with the computer, because I'm quite old and going back to university now. The hardest thing is how to keep up with everything that comes in with the computer. I think that the engine of my life has always been curiosity. I have two wonderful parents, a father and a mother, who had a very big successful career in films. But I think following them every day, I could see that they weren't really catering to their success, but they were catering to their curiosity. And I always saw that they were very happy once they just followed that road. And if sometimes they had to follow the road of success or they were tempted, that always led to something that were unhappy. So I think that this idea that I continued to study throughout my life, I started my career as a model. In fact, I was a high school dropout. At school, I was not successful at all. I always wanted to study animal behavior after reading, like you, Dario, a book by Konrad Lorenz. But it seemed impossible because studying was so difficult for me. But I did resume studying when I was, as an adult, finishing first my undergraduate about now maybe 10 years ago at NYU, and then going to a lecture at Hunter. I found out that Hunter had just opened a Department of Animal Behavior and Conservation, and so I completed my master, but it took me 5 years. That's another thing. And I think that you learn that with age, that if you follow your curiosity, you just, there isn't a goal. I never knew that I really was going to have a master. I wished I did, but I wasn't sure. But I just did it slowly, little by little by little. And I can't believe that I came so far. When I was 14 or 16, hoping to have a master, I would have never thought that I was going to get there at 67, but here I am. Another thing that I think Alfredo would like me to share with you is that whatever you do in life, I mean, because now I'm old, I can tell you as an old person and why, with the wisdom of old age, that things come back. At the beginning, it seemed to me that my life was very fragmented. I was a model, but really my heart was into animals and science. And then I was acting, and that was part of the family tradition, but it looked very fragmented. And then little by little, it all came together. So I started to write films about animal behavior, but also fashion and advertisement, which has been so much part of my life, was really helpful in creating my first series of short films. Because in advertisement, you have very few, 1 minute or a minute and a half, sometimes 30 seconds to deliver a very clear message. So I really learned, although I wasn't writing it, but I was working with people that were writing it, and I could see how to be succinto, how do you say? Now I spoke Italian. Concise and aim. So even advertisement, it seems so far away from science, or even the contradiction of science, was helpful in the communication of science. So I'm going to show you first a little film I'm going to show you a series of little films that I've made. This one is called Noah's Ark. And also I wrote it. I wanted to show you, maybe Courtney, my assistant, can show you the images of how I write the script, which it was very clear to me and to my associate, but then when I showed it to filmmakers, they said, we don't know how to read it, because the way I did it, I did the images, and then here I wrote the dialogue, and down underneath I explained the close-ups, what I was going to say, the camera, and here was the dialogue. So I sort of invented a way that it seemed to me very clear. But I was told that's not the way to do it. But anyway, I did it, and it was clear for 3-4 people that I was working with. And this film that I'm going to show you is called Noah's Ark, and it's about a few questions that I've asked myself after taking a class in biology and saying, how did Noah do it? So here it is.
How did Noah do it? How did he manage to organize all animals into couples? As it is written in the Bible, Noah gathered the animals into his ark in order for them to reproduce and repopulate the earth after the flood. 1 male and 1 female. Couples. You, why are you alone? I'm an earthworm. I am an hermaphrodite. I'm both male and female. To reproduce, I can mate with another hermaphrodite, or I can segment my body and clone myself. What did Noah do with hermaphrodite animals? What did he do with transsexual animals? You! What's that pile? We are Credula fornicata. We are all male. To fornicate, we form a pile. Then one of us, the bottom, turns into a female. Animals that change sex eventually become male and female, but in the transition, what are they? You. Too many. But we are aphids. We are all females. We are a parthenogenetic species, and we give birth, virgin births, to our daughters. 1 male, 1 female. You. 2 females. I said 1 male and 1 female. Where is he? We are whiptail lizards. Our species doesn't need males anymore. We simulate sex among us girls to start up our hormones. And then we have daughters. No sons, only daughters. How did Noah do it? Hermaphrodite transvestites, transgender transsexuals, polygamy, monogamy, homosexual, bisexual. How could it all be heterosexual?
So this is one of my courses. To show more films, can that light that shines right into the screen, can it be turned off because it wipes out the image?
Sure.
But so not now, but we show the other film. So I started this short film series with a television channel called the Sundance Channel that is an experimental. Sundance is known for their film festivals, but it also has a lab where they promote people that want to have a change in their career. And so they asked me if I did a film about my dad. It was called My Dad is 100 Years Old. My father was a director called Roberto Rossellini, and I did this 20-minute film, and my dad was an enormous belly that was talking to me. My father was fat. Well, some people took offense, but Robert Redford liked it, bought it for the Sundance, and then asked me if I wanted to become a writer, director, and he was looking for a short film series on conservation. And so at first I said no, and then I said, oh yes, I could do that. And I started, I gave 3 examples, 3 little pilots of films about how animals reproduce. They were called green porno. And when they were shown, green porno, they got a very big success on the internet. And that allowed me to work for Sundance and made a series of 40 short films, and Noah's Ark was one of them. It was We did it when there was the debate. They wanted me to be quite controversial. They like it at Sundance. And, and it was about to pass the same-sex marriage. And so they wanted to have something about definition of genders. And that's how when we did Noah's Ark. As I continued to study and learn more about animals, I worked with a scientist called Claudio Campagna, who's an Argentinian who's associated with the Bronx Zoo, WCS. And he wanted to infuse in my films more of a conservation message. Me, I always wanted to just be comical because I feel that that the news, that the bad news that animals are extinct, there is climate change, all the bad news, we have saturated the information, and we can't really recruit any more people with that talk. But I thought that animal always made me laugh, and that's why I wanted to study them. And if I could capture what is it about animal that made me laugh, then I could maybe open the ears to other people that might say, oh, they make me laugh too. Therefore, let's try to conserve them just for the sake of a laugh. I'm not very technical at all, and so when I decided that I was going to make my own films, I decided to make them very simply. That's why my set, you know, I work with two other people, Rick Beyer, Rick Gilman, Andy Beyer, and now Courtney, who I've met because she was picking tomatoes, and I was saying, oh, I do some drawings. I would like to have somebody, maybe find somebody who can animate them because I could like to make some animation. She said, oh, I just studied animation. So now Courtney and I'll show you at the end a little film that we've made about chickens. But the next film that I would like to show you is this one that has a more explicit conservation message. Now, but I want to tell you that sometimes it's hard to communicate an idea, whether you are a scientist or a filmmaker. So the way I did it is that I did it with the language that I know I can control. So I didn't want to work with very big special effects because I don't understand them. I don't know how to do them. And I'm afraid that then somebody will come and say, I'll tell you, Isabella, what to do. And I know that I've been, you know, a lot of people tell me what to do and, you know, and are paternalistic toward me. And, you know, and I'm used to say, okay, answering. So I said, I'm not going to work with anything that I don't know how to control, because what I have to say, it has to be very clear. So I looked at early cinema, and really what inspired me, I don't know if any of you study cinema, is the Georges Méliès. This was a toy maker, and he started to make film. He was really playing with film that was just invented, and he made the first films. The most famous one is The Trip to the Moon. And he had an enormous camera that he couldn't move, of course. So the camera is always like this, and then occasionally they moved the camera and they did a close-up. You didn't need all the complications that you have today with the different cameras that you do, a wide shot, a reverse shot, the jib, the steady cam, you know, you have all these things, and then you say, oh, well, how do I control it, you know? And then somebody else does it for you, and then you lose your conversation. I remember my father always said, keep it simple and cheap, because then you can control. If it is too expensive, then somebody wants the money back, and then they say, why would you do that? And so that word, cheap and simple. So my films are very inspired by Méliès. They are straightforward. There is never a reverse shot, if any of you is a filmmaker. And the sets are made mostly on paper. They're shot sometimes in my house, sometimes in a studio. And the whole idea, it was to just concentrate everything on the message in the fun way, but a way that we could control, not with so many people and a lot of expenses. So this is the film about squid that I made with Claudio Campagna, who works at WCS in Patagonia. But you know, the Bronx Zoo finances a lot of studies in the wild. and they're doing a study in Patagonia on the fisheries.
Yum. Fried calamari, my favorite. If I were a calamari, I would be a squid, and everyone would want to eat me. I would squirt black ink from my anus so that I can disappear and propel myself off. By luminescent effects and by changing shape, I can communicate. I can say, be careful. I can say, I love you, with my whole 3 hearts. I would give the most passionate 20-arm embrace. 20, 18, 2 are not arms, if you know what I mean. I would slip my spermatophore, a package full of sperm, into her spermatheca. We live in the darkness of the abyss, but at night, we would vertically migrate toward the surface of the sea. Where we could be caught by fisheries. I lost my appetite. What to do? Ask, ask, ask. Biologist Claudio Campagna.
We're taking from the oceans much, much more than what the oceans can offer us. One way of understanding the dimension of what we are doing to the ocean is to have a look at the squid fisheries. These are particularly illustrative because they take place at night, and as a result of that, they can be seen by satellites because they use a lot of light to attract squid to the surface. The amount of light is so huge, so intense, that sometimes overshadows big cities like Buenos Aires with 10 to 12 million people.
So Claudio had this imagery of the fishery, and yet, they can take all the fish in in 50 miles radius, so all the animals that live there, whether they're penguin or they starve, and so they had they were doing the counting of how many animals were starving and the population of animals because his fishery is short. And he was able to sneak and film all these fisheries. And the satellite image of the amount of light, I thought he was very telling. So that was one of a series of films that we did with a much more explicit conservation message. I continued to make more films as I studied, and I stumbled upon a book that I liked very much called Sexual Selection by Marlene Zuk. And then I discovered that Marlene Zuk is a feminist biologist and was associated with other feminist biologists, and they were asking questions that were very interesting to me, like, does maternal instinct really exist? We all seem to have an idea about it, but then when you are really looking into it, it's very, very vague. So as I studied, I think my material became more like the first one that I've seen it was more social. What is gender? I was still very open to things that I was learning. I think I didn't know that animals could be hermaphrodites, they can change sex. Maybe I was told when I was in school, but I don't think so because I went to non-school. I think that if they told me so complicated with so many scientific words that I didn't understand it at all. I thought everything was male, female, and that was it. So with Marlene Zuk, it was very interesting because the idea was, can gender define your destiny? And if it's true that there is an essence of being a female, and the essence of female, because we have babies, is to care about them, then does it mean that we are destined to take care of our children and, by extension, of others? Is a woman, just by its nature, destined to be more the one that takes care? That was a very alarming question, because all of us wanted to have the freedom to decide our destiny. So she did studies about different animals to see if it's true that the mamas were always completely dedicated to their babies. Now, the only thing that why is the image so poor? Is it the light, or is it the screen is too big, or because you can hardly see it? The screen is too big. So I hope you can see them, because they're very colorful. They look like a children's book. Only that when I see them in this screen, sometimes you lose the images because the sharpness, because the screening is too big for the format of the film that we brought. So I apologize for it. I don't know anything about technique, so here is one example of how we filmed and then we projected not completely correctly. But here is a series, Mamas. I've done 10 films, and I chose 2 mamas at the opposite extreme. One completely self-sacrificing, and the other one not at all.
I am not a monster. Yes, I killed my baby and ate him. It was my 10th child. I was exhausted. If I had been an hamster, he would have been considered natural. If I were an hamster. It's me who decides how many babies I can raise. A baby? 2? 3 babies? 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 babies. That's plenty. 9, 10. 10 babies? How am I going to feed them all? This one is cute. He has long legs. It will run fast. This one has big ears. It will hear miles away. This one is so small and skinny. What will be of it? It's a good morsel to recoup some vitamin and protein that I lost during childbirth. It will give me strength to take care of the other babies. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 8 is enough. If I were an hamster, I would not be in prison. I would have not been considered a monster, but a good administrator of my strength, abilities, and resources. I love my children. They're all for me. I would give my life for them, as if I were Diael Gandros, the spider. I guard my egg sac. With my web, I catch flies. I catch many flies. I have to gain weight to nourish my babies, my spiderlings, when they're born. When they come out of the egg sac, my babies are ravenous. If I don't let them eat me, they would eat each other. We spiders are cannibals. Ouch! First, my babies eat my limbs. But babies eat only mushy food, right? So to help them, I turn my body into mush. Of course, being a mother requires some sacrifices. But isn't this the essence of femininity? Ay, baby, you're biting me. The essence of femininity is to give ourselves. Altruism is in our nature. What's greater than self-sacrifice? It's what makes a woman a woman. Isn't it?
Thank you. So Marilyn Izuki is a wonderful, wonderful scientist, and she writes also wonderful, funny books. And it was fantastic to collaborate with her and Claudio. And you know, I work as much as I now today, unfortunately, is my last day. But I do this monologue called Link Link Circus, and the title means that we're linked with animals. Of course, when Charles Darwin said that we are animals too, a lot of people took enormous offense, and they said, oh no, we are not animals at all, we're different, we're separated. But there is this continuum that actually I find it very touching. And so my new monologue, Link Link Circus, that I'm going to do tonight for the last night at Hunter College, is evidence of the scientific studies that links us with animals, not only through physical, you know, I play Darwin in the monologues. So in some of these films that you see, Darwin comes and shows in an X-ray machine that the bones that form our hand are the same that form the bat's wing or the fin of the whale. And so I question, why can't the brain be the same? Different, but the same, as Darwin said. So this is the monologue that I'm doing now and concluding tonight. Is there any questions? They don't have to be just about this latest work that I've done. It can be about modeling, can be about anything. Yes? Okay. Sorry.
Thanks. I'm Sandy. Can you hear me?
Hi, yes, yes, I can.
You know, I loved your films, and I hope they get widespread circulation. They're educational in the narrow and the broader sense. I just wanted to add one thing that I remember is that in one case, the hermaphroditic transition is initiated through behavior. And the Australian wrasse lives in harems. There's a male that dominates a whole set of females. And what happens is if the male dies, there's competition, and the most aggressive of the remaining females within a few days develops a testosterone or testosterone equivalent supply that changes into a male, and that new male dominates the rest of the females. But I don't know of too many instances like that in which strictly behavioral initiation that obviously induces hormonal changes is responsible for that type of transition.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know either. I don't know either. When I think I made my films, and this is one of the difficulties, how much do you make it I keep in mind the audience who, like me, might have not known even that they are hermaphroditic animals or that they're animals that change sex. And so I try to really, really simplify it. I try to read as much as I can about the animal or understand it all, but I try to, my messages are pretty simple, and they're really intended for an audience that doesn't really know anything about animals or has never questioned the thing. I don't know that you know, that I would address it to you because you seem to be very knowledgeable. So, but my films are, all these short films, they are in YouTube. Not that I want it to be there because the internet can reach a lot of people, but there is no way to monetize it. And it's one of the reasons why I went back to the theater, because I need some of the money back to produce the next series of things that I would like to do. Even if they're not terribly expensive, my films, there's still paper to buy and employees to pay and a cameraman to film and light to rent. And so I went back to the theater because one of the great difficulties, and I don't know if any of you is in the film business, so it seems to be on its way to be resolved, is this way of monetizing the internet for filmmakers. And that's why I said, okay, we'll go back to where in the Greek times, we go to the theater, there is a box office, there's 100 people, this is how much money you make. You take 50%, I take 50, you take 10, and that's how we solved it. So in the last few years, I've done more theater, and generally in small theater, because of course my work is always very experimental. But I worked at Brooklyn Academy of Music here in New York, at the Baryshnikov Art Center. I was in Chicago recently, but I forgot the name of the theater. Generally, they are sort of kind of avant-garde theaters. Is there any other question here?
Here's the mic.
Hi, thank you. My name's Katina. I just kind of wanted to ask, you mentioned at the very beginning sort of that your life was fragmented, the pieces came together, and you alluded also that you've done so many different things. And so in essence, I was kind of wondering also, again, the biology of animals tend to transform as a hormonal reaction to a transformation. I'm just wondering what you're, like when you're taking on a new path or going in a new direction, is there something that pushes you in that direction or pulls you in that direction, or do you think there's any sort of like, as in how do humans change and behave, and why do they transform in essence, and what is your process in that?
Well, I think that I was really responding more to a question that I was always told, you never make up your mind, you never know what you're doing, you're modeling and you're acting. Are you acting or you're modeling? You're writing, you're drawing. What are you? Are you a painter? Are you a writer? You know, it was always these things that I always kind of grew like, oh my God, what am I? Then people said, oh, you're a Gemini. Well, Gemini, they never really, decide on doing on one direction. But, whatever it was, I did several things. Sometimes they came to me. I didn't seek modeling. Modeling came to me, and I loved it. It was wonderful, and it was a great adventure. I worked with fantastic photographers like Penn, Avedon, Stephen Meisel, Bruce Weber, fantastic artists. They taught me so much, and the photography aspect of fashion really I loved. I also loved that sometimes fashion can be done by incredible artists whose clothing are references to paintings, to sculpture. It isn't just these colors can be coordinated. It wasn't that simple. Or you work with Stella McCartney, who is such a conservationist. She only looks for alternatives to create things that are, the only thing that inspires her is to find sustainable things. Even she does the sole of the shoes. Apparently they are based on petrol. And so she's finding different solutions for the soles of the shoes. I didn't even know that. So, you discover incredible people in even an industry that has the reputation of being the most frivolous. And so modeling was to me a surprise and an incredible delight. But when I start writing and making this film, I thought, oh, I can tell people that have told me all my life, what are you? Make up your mind. That it all came together finally. Because I think these films are about film, and that's my background. I'm acting. I'm pretending to be all the animals. I'm directing, and also I draw all the costumes. And although I have Andy and Rick execute them, I draw all the art direction. So all of a sudden, even fashion was there. And I think I did learn from fashion. I learned from fashion, or even layout in magazines. When you do a photo shoot for Vogue and you do 4 or 5 pages, how do you make that to be a story so that then when you finish these pages, now there is another story? And that, I never thought about it, but I learned it as a model. You make there is something that puts it all together, where there is a background, a type of light, or something. That's why I decided that my films, they had to have this art direction that made them a whole little story on itself. So, they didn't colors, patterns, paper, and all this created the one image that can complete a story, because we are very visual human beings. So we understand a lot through visuals, and I paid a lot of attention through visual, and that is one of the reasons why I draw my script, and I force myself to draw, because it forces me not to resolve things in words, because words can be ambiguous and can be wordy, and if you go see films that have a lot of words, you're bored stiff. And so by drawing my script, I already trained myself to think of images. So I don't know if I've answered your questions, but I think it might happen to you too in your life that you study this, but then you get a job on another field and it pays well, so you do that job, and it's really wonderful and interesting. I wouldn't have never thought, but how do I reconcile? But somehow, by the time you get to be my age, sometimes things work all together, and we have taught at school to compartmentalize, and are you a doctor or are you a lawyer? But then you can be both, and things seems to be finding again the reconciliation, because your life, of course, you dictate a lot of what you want your life to be, but life also offers you opportunity, and it's really great to be able to navigate those two. So this energy of being like a surfer, you are on top of the wave, but the wave has its own life too. It's as you get older, you can see things are reconciling more. I mean, when I was younger, I didn't see that. But as older, I do. Yes?
Isn't that a living lab, right? So isn't what she's saying, right? It gives this feeling, which is why, I'm such a fan, and you know it. And every time I listen to her stories, it feels so much like what we do in science, right? Your story is exactly the story of writing a paper, right? How many of you here do write a paper for science and stuff? What she tells you is exactly the same thing. It's like, so you have an idea, you have, right, an intro, and then you have to make it concise, and then you have to close that story with some evidence, and that evidence immediately leads you to what she called the next page, right, which is exactly the next article you're going to write, right? So, and this experimental, you are mentioning all the words that we do use, in academia, which is kind of this other environment of experimental, right? And you're questioning about what is gender, right? And what is open science and how to make things easy to understand. So my question is, I have a question that is, how did you get to such a level of ability to tell things so clearly and in such a simple way? How did you learn? Because I think that this, especially for our undergraduate students, that's the best thing that they want to learn. It's like, how can I really make myself clear?
So I think that green porno started really by reading the scientific papers that are so difficult to decipher. And so I found myself reading it and say, okay, this animal doesn't open the mouth like this, but opens the mouth like this. And as I was doing that, I saw myself saying, okay, instead of having a mouth that it opens horizontally, I have a mouth that opens vertically, or I have a mouth that opens vertically and horizontally. And then as I was imagining this, just trying to follow this difficult paper, I thought, here's my visual. I will transform myself in the animal. So you start with yourself and you say, okay, if I were a fly, I would have eyes like this, and I would see everywhere, and I would have wings, and and this is how it became this kind of surrealist talk. Being concise and precise, I think I learned through advertisement. Because advertisement has to be, though they might just do it for you to buy the product, but there is this ability to really extrapolate what is important, what you want to say, and then a lot of other things can be said by images too. So a lot of things, that's why I draw and then do films, because you don't have to say certain things if you see them. You know, my father used to say, and my father loved cinema, and he thought it was this new technology that would defeat ignorance in the world. He was very optimistic, because he said, you know, if you have to describe an elephant to a person who had never seen it, you'd say it's a very big, very wrinkly, very long nose, and each person would have a different idea of what an elephant looks like. But if you show a photo or if you show a film of an elephant, you immediately have a very precise information in a second. And so whatever I can transform into an image, that gives, you know, that gives the information that I don't have to elaborate with words. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but, and then also, you know, I think narration is part of what I grew up with. I think at the end of the day, making films is narrative. And by that, I work with David Lynch a lot, and David Lynch is certainly not straight narrative, it's surrealism, you can't understand anything, so I'm not saying that it has to be just narrative, but it has an atmosphere, it has a world. By that, I mean a narrative. A narrative can be surreal, it can be abstract, but it has a style, it has a mood that it's trying to capture. So I come from that background, so that maybe it was an advantage because it was part of my culture. I had a hardest time coming to university and write paper where you have to do this, you know, the abstract where you say in one paragraph what you're going to say after, but you make it longer, and then the conclusion is you saying it a third time, but with other words. I just thought, but that, you know, I remember that it was completely against everything that I had learned in films, because if you say it at the beginning, how do you create suspense? And then you have to say it again, but longer? I mean, that seems very boring. So, sorry, yes.
Thanks so much, and I just wanted to say that, like, I really appreciated the squid film and the approach to kind of giving us a conservation message in a way that we really haven't seen before, and just kind of putting that at the opposite end of the spectrum from something like, you know, one of these huge production Planet Earth kind of features where, you know, there's a real formula to it. And I think we get maybe a little desensitized to that. It was really amazing to see something that's, you know, coming and using humor, using art, and I'm just curious, like, what your approach is for the conservation type messaging and how that might be different from some of the other work that you do, and if you're working on anything else in that area.
Well, I don't see myself like an advocate or a preaching. I never thought I was wise enough to say anything, you know, so I just follow my curiosity, and then if somebody along the way I can share what I discovered, I'm pleased. It's hard. I do agree with you that there is a certain amount of messaging about, especially climate change or conservation, that has saturated that it's, you know, and I didn't want it to repeat that because, first of all, it had been said so beautifully by so many, but also I think that you didn't want to hear it. That were the one that didn't want to hear it, we're not going to hear it. So I thought, well, you know, what is it that makes me interested in animals? And it was humor, because they make me laugh. I mean, I don't know why they make me laugh. I thought only dogs would make me laugh, but now I have chickens. They make me laugh too. There's just something very funny about animals. I don't know what it is. And so I tried to capture that aspect of things that make me elated when I see them. And maybe I was just born with it. I mean, I definitely, since I was a little girl, I always loved animals. I had, because probably there was a sense of happiness when I was around them, and wonderment. From the beginning, I asked if they, if they could feel and think like we do.
I've always been perplexed by a passage in the Bible about mankind or humankind having dominion over animals, and I don't know if that means that we have the ability to decide their life or their death.
The water, sorry. No, I was looking for my water, I'm sorry.
That, and also when looking at the wonderful presentation, I was thinking of how the fictional, if that ever came, like the centaur or Aphrodite or the mermaid and all these fantasial realms, but I'm very satisfied with this. But I can't feel dominion so much because, I mean, I'm controlled by, like you say, the link. We're in link. And so that dominion, however.
So one day I went to the Metropolitan Museum trying to look at all the paintings and to see if there was a way that I could see through the centuries different ways of representing nature. And one of the things that I have seen, that it was for many, many centuries, it was this feeling of God giving us wild animals or forest for us to complete his work, which was agriculture or domestication of the animals, that we were going, and I think that was the Catholic message or the interpretation so far of the Bible, that God gave us the animal and the earth for us to rule, which doesn't mean for us to eat it and destroy it. It might also mean to just be a good steward of it. But it was interesting to see, and my sister has a PhD from Columbia University on medieval literature, and so we sometimes talk about it, and we do a lecture together. And there is one particular image of, it's a medieval mosaic of Jesus, and I know he's Jesus because he has the beard, and he's looking at a man down, and the man doesn't have the beard, but it has exactly the same face, suggesting this is God, the incarnation of God, Jesus, and now there is a ray that goes from Jesus to the man, and the background, there is all these wild animals, and I assume that the message is now the man would have to control the animals that are there. Of course, the narrative nowadays is completely different, and that's why Darwin created such a scandal when he said that we were animals, because it wasn't this direct link to human God, and we were kind of a mirror of God, a lesser version, but now we are all linked. And so he also creates a lot of moral issue. I have a farm, and I have animals, and I have chickens, but I cannot seem to be eating. I'll be able to eat my chickens, so I'm not a vegetarian, but I cannot eat my chickens. That once you know them personally, it's really difficult to eat. And I thought it was me. I thought, oh, maybe it's me because I'm a model, I'm an actress, I'm stupid, I'm urban, I have a farm, but I can't really be a farmer. And then I found out that it's very common among a lot of farmers. A lot of them are not vegetarian, but they eat their next door neighbor chickens, and they reciprocate chicken. So that to me is also kind of interesting, that there is something so profound in us that it creates like a taboo. Before I thought it was just me. I thought, you know, I'm a model, I'm an actress, I'm urban. Now I moved to the country, I have a farm. Of course I am, you know, I treat them as if they are children because I'm something wrong with me. But then when I saw that there is this common problem, it is also another, it would be very interesting to investigate what is it that defines society or defines a group, defines us, and how can you violate it, for example, by eating it. I know that, you know, I know the general rules that you don't call, you say hamburger, you don't say I'm eating a cow, you know, you camouflage it so that you don't identify it. But of course, if we're linked with animal, there is this, I always feel very, very happy when I find out, you know, that there's ants that do horrible things like us. So I say, oh, we're not alone. You know, there are ants that have aphid, that they treat like we treat our cows. They control them, they milk them. There are ants that enslave other ants. They pick them up from their nest. And they, because the ants, they recognize each other's, I mean, probably you know more, but ants, they recognize each other by smell, so there is a type of ant that kidnaps other ants from another nest when they're small enough so they can assume the smell of this other nest. But actually then they are enslaved and they do all the work. Because they don't run away, because they think we belong here, we have the same smell, so they don't run away, and the others, it just controlled them. So I always feel like, oh, we're not alone. I know. So, you know, that is... Oh, there you are.
Such a pleasure to see you this morning. I'm such a fan, and this morning I actually listened to you singing Blue Velvet, so I get into the mood for the talk. I think what you said earlier about animals and the connection when you meet something, it also applies to people and the other, like people we marginalize or they're stigmatized. When you get to know that group of people, individual stories, you start to care and you don't ignore that. So that was an insightful comment you made that made me think about work more generally in human rights.
Yes, you do. You know, for example, my chickens, and I'll show you a little film about chickens. My chickens, I have 4 different coops. And the chicken, they establish their society, their flock, in the first week that they grow up together. Then if you bring new chickens, there is tension and they start fighting. So that's why I have 4 coops. And so they, you know, I start one coop and then buy more chickens and they start another coop and all that. And then I let them all out in the farm, and so they mingle. But it's interesting to see how they mingle. They all have their, you know, they don't just mingle like this. They all stayed in different areas. Occasionally there is one that goes into another group. But as soon as it becomes sundown, they all go back to their respective homes. They know what is homes, and they know who they belong to. That to me is fascinating.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I have a more broad question for you. I'm fascinated and interested in this connection between fiction and nonfiction and playing a role in real life. And I wonder whether there were roles you played that stayed with you and changed your behavior in after you finished playing the role on the stage, and you saw, I don't know, saying something differently or thinking about something differently, or even your expressions. Just
well, you
interesting
do
in
learn.
that
You know, I mean,
transition.
you mentioned Blue Velvet, and to me, that was a very controversial film. It's an old film, it's about 35 years ago. But when it came out, it was very controversial. And I some of Alfredo is from Italy, Dario is from Italy, and we came from Italy where there was a period when we were young. Alfredo was much younger, but when I was a teenager, where we had a lot of kidnappings because you had a lot of political tension, and we became familiar with something I didn't know it existed, which is the Stockholm Syndrome, the Patricia Hearst syndrome. And so when we did Blue Velvet, I thought that the character I was playing, Dorothy Valance, was victim of something that I had witnessed growing up in Italy during a period of social unrest and with a lot of kidnapping. But interestingly enough, David Lynch didn't want to know about that, didn't want to know. The directors, they write a story and they want to tell a story. They don't want, then the actors, they have to create a story to create a biography of the person they're going to portray. You cannot portray somebody without saying, well, who are my parents? How did I grow up? Why have I become that person? So you create a biography of your characters. The director, they don't want to know that. Some do, but most of them, they don't want to do it. David gave me a wonderful idea in mind that I understood what he was looking for. He said to me, when I was a little boy, I came home with my brother, and there was a naked lady walking in the streets. And I understood immediately that something was wrong. I didn't think it was exciting. I didn't go up and say, hey, you're available. I started to cry because I knew there was something horrible. And this is what I want you to portray in Blue Velvet. There is the last one of the scene in Blue Velvet where I walk down the street. So that was very powerful to me because he gave me the idea of what David was looking at, something mysterious, but yet it frightens you, but you don't know why. And he didn't want to know all the background that I was creating. But for me, it was impossible. I cannot create a character if I don't create a background. So for me, when Dorothy Valance, the character that I play, walks naked down the street, it was, as an actress, I imagined that she came from a very violent scene where she was maybe raped or beaten, and then she runs away, and she doesn't have time to wear any clothes. She runs off in the street. And then I thought, what is the gesture that would show me completely helpless? And an image of a photographer called Nick Ut came to mind. It was a photo of a young Vietnamese girl that walks naked. Her village has just been burned by napalm bomb. And there was such a helplessness when she's naked, and you don't say, well, why isn't this girl dressed? You immediately see a complete sense of despair. Nothing has left. And so that I decided that I was going to assume that gesture, because even if I was in the street walking like this, it still gave me the idea that this woman understood that she was in the street, that she was alone, that she was naked, that she had, instead like this, was nothing left. And so, that's how, but David didn't want to know any of that, So actors work on their character in portraying and then you show to the director, and they just have to react to whatever is that they're trying to portray an emotion, and they say, yeah, that works, and when I walk like this, he said, oh yes, you look completely helpless. I said, that was what I was aiming at, so it looks good, so we did it. That was a huge scandal, because of course, frontal nudity, so the critics wrote very badly, and so it was hard, but this is how you create a character and how a director works. Sometimes you communicate something, sometimes you don't. They just have to react to what you propose them as an actress. I don't know, have I answered your question? Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So I am also a model and an actress right now, and I go to Hunter College Elementary School, so that I think that was very cool. So I have two questions. Do you ever share these at schools? And have you ever spoke at the UN?
No, I never spoke at the UN. I did give commencement speech. My children went to the United Nations school. The United Nations has a school, and I'm European, and for us it's very important to speak foreign languages. I speak 4, and I was able to teach my children 3. It's very difficult in America because everybody speaks English, and it's really difficult to speak another language home, because I always say my children just learn to be patient, because I would say, La cena è pronta, la cena è pronta. And then I had to say at a certain point, dinner is ready. So they just learned how to be patient, because sooner or later I was going to say it in English, or because my husband didn't understand it anyway in Italian. So, so I did send them to the United Nations, because they have a very big program in foreign languages. And so it wasn't only me forcing them to learn languages, but also the school. And then I gave them the commencement speech there. So that was the only time I gave a speech at the UN. And then the other question was, what was the second question?
If you ever shared these at school.
At school, well, yes, you know, at Hunter College, I'm finishing my master, and they have a theater department. And the theater department and the animal behavior department are called, I mean, my ultimate goal is to be an environmental artist, if you want, an artist who is inspired by the environment. So there was a collaboration between the theater department and the animal behavior department, and they have a small theater, not bigger than this room, and this is where I perform Link Link Circus. And guess what? I'm performing it with a dog. I have a trained dog with me, because there's a little circus, and the dog comes up dressed up with 6 different animals. A dinosaur, a sheep, a bee, a lion.
Aw, I'm just a
A chicken, too. Thank you.
One last.
Hi. First, thank you so much as well for coming. And also, there's been so many wonderful questions. Mine is about, related to a previous question, like I'm also very fragmented, and I came from an art background, and now I'm studying science, and people are like, what are you doing? And I wonder if you have advice for sort of finding different avenues for all of the different ideas someone might, like me or anyone else in this room, might have for kind of combining the art and science and communicating that to people. But then also, you've been talking so much about chickens. I wonder if you could tell us what your favorite chicken is, or your favorite chicken story.
I don't have a recipe that say you do that and people will listen to you. If you have an idea, something that you felt that hasn't been said, you do it, and you do it with the instrument that you have. For me, it was to create simple film that was basically based on Méliès's technique when he didn't have anything else but a big camera that can move like that. And you just tell what it is that you want to say. Distribution is always difficult. I mean, nowadays you can put it on YouTube and hope that people will see it on social media, but you know, it's the abyss. That part is always very difficult. It is the most difficult, and finding money. The finding money and distribution, that's really the hardest always. In terms of chickens, so chickens are very fascinating. I didn't know, and I've learned studying, that there is a lot of farm animals that are endangered. That is breeds, not the species. Of course, there is 20 billion chickens a year that are slaughtered and we eat them, so it's not the species, it's not endangered. But breeds are endangered. You might be more familiar with the heirloom. The heirloom is the kind of vegetables they haven't found to be favored by industrial farming because maybe they bruise or they don't have a very long shelf life. And so when you go to the supermarket, you find one type of spinach, one type of asparagus. But of course, there are many different spinaches. There are many types of asparagus. That goes from wild spinach to domesticated spinach, and then they change according to regional climate and soil. But nowadays, we have a lot of abundance, but not the abundance of biodiversity. We have one asparagus. We have one, you probably know that in Norway, now there is a bank, a seed bank. They try to keep all the seed to try to preserve this biodiversity. Well, the same thing has happened with farm animals, and I didn't know. It was logic. The chicken that we eat is basically one breed of chicken that was selected in the last years. It's called the broiler. It's quite much bigger. It's 4 times bigger than a regular chicken. In fact, so much so that the chicken that we buy is slaughtered at 8 weeks. 8 weeks, that's not even, it's not even an adult. A chicken reaches sexual maturity in 4 or 5 months. So it's a baby. And you have to slaughter it because otherwise the weight would crack its bones or deform its bones. And this has been what has been selected in the last years because we select for fat. In the meat, you can nowadays eat the chicken. We don't even need a knife. We eat muscles. So see the extent, I didn't realize it all came together as I was studying, the extent of how much we torture chickens. So at my farm, I always have heritage chicken. And the definition, I work with a foundation called the Livestock Conservancy. And the Livestock Conservancy's aim is to bring back diversity, the same way organic farming, which the intent was to cultivate without chemical pesticides, but also brought back heirlooms to create an alternative in the market. Their aim is now to also bring back all these different breeds of animals that are endangered. So yesterday or 2 days ago, we received 50 Crèvecœur. That is a chicken that is black with a hairdo like this, crazy, red, beautiful. I have about 20 different breeds, all heritage breeds. The definition of heritage breed is an animal that has slow growth, meaning that the skeleton is strong enough to sustain her weight when she's an adult, that is able to forage, because sometimes you select them and they are unable to move for fatness, or they lose and also reproduce naturally. One of the things that you may not know, but now I'm going to ruin for you Thanksgiving, is that turkeys that we eat, and so are chickens, are all artificially inseminated. See, did you know you could have that job, for example? See, life. So turkeys are artificially inseminated because they get so fat that they cannot reach their sexual organs. I didn't know that. So there is a person that does that job. So I also have turkeys. They are all also heritage breeds. So now I have about 200 chickens, and yesterday we just got 50 of a very critically endangered breeds called the Crèvecœur. And the Crèvecœur is a particularly moving story for me, because I was born right after the war, Second World War. And so the plight of the war was very present, because I saw in the adults they couldn't talk about it. If there was the siren at noon, they all panicked still like that, because they played the sirens before the bombardment. It was just only noon, but for years they would react. And the Crèvecœur is born in a region of France, Normandy, where there were most of the fights. So the chickens, as people were killed, so of course were chickens, and the few that were alive were eaten. So the Crèvecœur, which was a regional chicken of this region in Normandy, has basically gone extinct. It became critically endangered. And then as industrial farming right after the war settled in, that chicken was, other breeds were favored, and that one was forgotten. So now we're trying to bring it back. And I just received 50 of them yesterday. And the best news is that when you buy chicks, they sell them to you by mail. The post office called me and said, Isabella, there is a beeping package. And we ran to the post office, and there is scientists that study. Look, I'm going to tell you another tip of another job. This is incredible to me. If you buy chickens, the smallest amount of chickens you can buy in the winter is 25, but in the summer you can buy 15. That is because they have to create enough heat to be in that box, and the box has holes. So if it's the temperature, but who have done that study? That's incredible. The dimension of the box that can contain 25 chickens in the winter, so they will keep themselves warm. And then if the weather is warmer, then you can do 15. But most of the time when we receive chickens, some die, or some die within the first 2 days. And I thought that this critically endangered one was going to be kind of frail, because of course the Adam and Eve of the Crèvecœur, there might be a lot of inbreeding at first, and so they might be not very strong birds. But they all survived so far. So we'll see. The next difficult things that I have to do is that whenever I say to the people that I raise chicken for eggs, an endangered species, all is happy. When I say, but now we want to raise them to eat them and change biodiversity, people go nuts and they become very hostile. It's very funny. And when I ask, are you vegan? Are you vegetarian? No. I think the separation from the reality has become so vast that I have to be careful when I post in Instagram this chicken I raised, or we're doing the dinner with this heritage breed, or we're asking a chef to come, because we get so much hostility. To me, it's amazing, but that's the next challenge, how to communicate something clearly. Because, of course, we are all in the same side. We all want the best for the chicken, but if you're not a vegetarian and you eat chicken, then why not bring back these heritage breeds that are much healthier than the modern breeds whose bones crack under their weight? So we'll see, but we'll get there. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Wilfredo.
All right,
Thank you.
time is up. I hope that you really got the sense of why Isabella is a living lab, right? She keeps telling you, and my next goal is going to be, and for sure, when she tells you the next goal, she already is thinking about 3 or 4 more. And that's just fantastic. So I want to tell you one last thing before we somehow we leave, is that in an era of science that has a keywords, open science, open education, women in STEM, queer in STEM, it would be just ridiculous, a waste of time and resources, and anachronistic to keep having a living lab that is based only on 1 person or 2 persons or 3 persons. So this initiative is for you. This initiative is open to everyone. Knock at my door at my office, send me an email. Spoiler alert, we are going to send you an email asking you what's the next topic you would like the Living Lab be about. And keep this idea going, because it's exactly about what we just saw. How many things can you do with the degree you are getting? How many people can you interact with and change their life by just saying, hey, my chickens have personality, like Isabella just did, okay? So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you so much, the Center for Teaching and Learning, Science and Society.